people here tonight. Later on in the agenda, we'll do a lot of introductions, but I do see that we have representatives from DEEP and UTC. We do not have them from ACOM tonight, which is the consulting party for UTC on the project. So next item is public participation. Yes, sir.
Paul Anderson, 89 Main Street, Brook. I've lived in this town since 1971. And I've been through the mill when it was still in existence before the tragic fire. I've been through Hamilton's facilities there. It was a very nice place. And it's a shame that it's gone. However, in its current condition, it's useless. And it needs to be usable again. That's taxable land that's not doing anybody any good, and nobody can develop there, and it's in the middle of our section of town. My understanding that there's government money been put up for this. I'd love to know how much and where it is, but we don't seem to be able to find that out. It's one of our big questions. We know there's hazardous material on the site. I've read the preliminary reports. Bottom line, we don't want it, we don't need it, and we will not accept it. Anything that is taken off or dug up out of that site needs to be removed and properly disposed of. We don't need hazards to people on property in the middle of our section of town. The Connecticut Water Company gets all of our local water from nearby wells. If you disturb hazardous materials, you must remove it regardless of cost. Our town has somewhere in the neighborhood of $7 million in its fund balance. I would be one of the first to propose that we put aside $1 to $2 million, and if this project is not done properly, we go to court. It would be a good investment. In the long run, if this was done right, all that money will come back in benefits to this town because that will be a viable commercial property. If it's done badly, it's not acceptable at all. That's my case.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Catherine Nealing, 39 Church Street. I've been here since 1989 when I bought my house. I just want to say that we don't want any contamination. We want it all removed, and removed so it does not spread via air, water, or soil, and we want it disposed of properly. There's a lot of people here I care about, and a lot of friends and family, and even some people I don't even care for, but I still don't want to see them contaminated. And our future is in this town if we allow it to grow properly. That's it.
Thank you.
Bill Hayes, 143 Rice Street. I've been in this town well over 40 years, served on the Board of Selectmen, and went through this with Hamilton back when I was in office, and it's been going on for quite a while. And I think the simple solution is to take it away. If we have to pay part of that, well be it. As Mr. Anderson said, there is money, so let's get rid of it.
Thank you. You had your hand up.
Bill Lewis, Melrose Road. Well, I've been a resident here for 83 years. I've been in the fire department for 62 years. I was chief when the mill burned down. We had many sites and problems with that mill when they were here, when Hamilton was down there. Sulfuric acid running over in the tanks. We had to close some of the buildings in town because of the fumes and so forth. Hamilton's been that way for a long time. When I was in the Connecticut Air National Guard in the late 50s, we had problems over there, and we burned a lot of tanks and gallons of fuel. We don't know what they were, chemicals, that Hamilton didn't want to get rid of properly. They put them over in the burn field for the Air National Guard to burn. We didn't know what we were burning, but for about 6 years that I was in there, we burned a lot of them barrels. Later on, they decided to have Ken Company up here take them barrels. They buried them along the Scandic River. Again, a cheap way of getting rid of chemicals. But again, the DEP got in there, because some of those barrels got broken into and busted when they put them in there. They deep seeped into the Scandic River. Again, Hamilton Sand looking for the cheap way. This 1,300 cubic yards, dig it up, put it in trucks, and move it out of town. Good place to move it, Hamilton Standard and Windsor Locks, across the river. It's their property, it's up to them to get rid of this. The material safety data sheets say anything that comes into your plant, you could take care of all of it. What you use, you write down how much you use. What you don't use, want to get rid of, you have to get rid of it the proper way. There are companies all around the world that get rid of chemicals. But Hamilton doesn't like to do it, I guess, because it costs too much. So they're doing the same thing here. They want to get out a cheap way. But I say get that 1,300 gallons out of town, off our aquifer, and let that property, there's plenty of dirt that they took out of the Brook Pond when they dug it up, that got piled up on that property over the coal pile that was down there. As far as the coal ash goes, when the Brook Company was here every day, they took the coal ash out of the burners down there, and they distributed it around town for driveways. Everybody in town had driveways. Mill Street, Depot Street, all of Main Street, up at the ballpark, where they had the ballpark up the back of the Tank Alley. That was coal tar all over. So we know what coal tar is, but that can be covered up like they want to do. So that part of it is good. But it's time they did something about it, cover that up, get rid of the contamination down here, and move it off the site, these volatile chemicals. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Charlie Szymanski, 57 Rockville Road in Broadbrook. I had been here quite a while myself, over 60 years, and we had a similar issue in some sense back in the mid-'80s when there was a proposal to build a nuclear waste dump within the Windsorville section right through to Ellington. And we fought very hard to have that stopped. And the people in surrounding towns, as well as a person of some notoriety, Jesse Jackson, came to help us to campaign against this. And I can tell you, from my standpoint, we absolutely, without question, cannot have another hazardous waste dump built in the center of Broadbrook, nor anywhere within the town of East Windsor. These are not the times to be doing that, and haven't been for a very long time. So whatever it will take, that we will do that, and we will campaign to stop that, because it will not happen.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Bob Light from 80 Rye Street. I guess I've been there 40 years. I spent a couple of terms on the Board of Selectmen, and I've been to several meetings like this, went through some of the same scenarios explained by a couple of the other guys here earlier. A couple of months ago, I was sent to your meeting. I'm the newest member of the Economic Development Commission, to state our concerns and our interest in the development of that property, ultimately economically. Rather than come and put you guys on a report, I'm truthfully saying that I saw such a good, coherent effort on all your behalfs, a myriad of backgrounds and professional responsibilities, but the meeting that I saw that night said, I got the confidence in you guys to get the job done and do it in a proactive way and becoming probably even partners with the people that own that property right now. And I got the confidence that you guys are going to do it, and I know if you want a little more input from the EDC at a later time, you'll come and ask for it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Yes.
I'm Bob Maynard. I live at 7 Blue Heron Way, and I'm the first selectman. And I have to say that you guys are doing a great job, and I really appreciate what you're doing, and I'll support you, and I think the town will too. So thank you for what you've done.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
Jason Bowser, 121 East Road. I'm also a sitting selectman. I want to echo Bob's comments and thanks to this commission for making progress on something that seemed never to have any progress made on it. I'm in my 5th year as a selectman, and for 3 of those, I spent nearly every meeting asking for a public update on the circumstances surrounding the mill. And at every instance, I was told it'll be 2 to 3 months. And that lasted for years. I'm very interested in finding out why the delay in sharing the information with the public and hearing what the proposal actually entails.
Thank you. Anyone else? Well, thank you all for your participation, and thank you all for showing up on behalf of the commission. I'm sure everyone is very happy that so many people have spoken tonight, and we hope you continue to voice your thoughts and your opinions. Any added agenda items? So we have a lot of new people here tonight, so the first thing that we have on our agenda is just introductions and to give you just a little bit of a background about the commission, since we do have so many folks here. This commission or committee was put together to really look into the Brook Mill site, what was going on with it, to get information, and then to make a recommendation based on what we found to the Board of Selectmen, and this meeting is a part of that tonight. We've had UTC attend our meetings, nearly all of them. Deep has attended one meeting before this, and they're here tonight to join our discussion. We've gotten background from the original plan that they put in place and the most recent sort of final plan, remedial action plan, and copies of that. And from that, we have learned about the soil contamination, exactly what kind of chemicals on there, chromium, volatiles, the coal ash that you spoke of. We've learned that there's contamination in the groundwater below it, that there's a plume of contamination there. We've learned from the plan that they want to put a 2-foot cap over most of the property and dig up these specific hotspots and take that contaminated soil and pile it up behind the Congregational Church and put impermeable barrier over it. We'll continue those discussions in our next bit, but now I didn't even introduce myself yet. I'm Jessica Bottomley. I'm the chairperson of this committee, and I'll start with Len.
Len Norton, downtown meeting.
Kurt Monstreet.
Andy Hoffman.
Rand Stanley.
Keith Yagelov.
And I know that we invited Board of Selectmen members to come. If you have a question, Board of Selectmen members, we absolutely encourage you to put those questions out there. Would you guys want to introduce yourself just so all the parties know who's here?
Well, I think we kind of did.
Yeah.
I'm Bob Minnick, the first selectman, and Jason spoke, and Charlie Szymanski spoke, and actually Andy's in
Andy is also on
I think Steve Dearborn's not here today.
Thank you. So I'll invite UTC and Deep to come up with a discussion. UTC/UTOS/Hamilton.
Here?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
okay, I just want to verify what my
Yep.
place to be was. Good evening, everybody.
I don't know how to
My
ask.
name's Robert Robinson. I'm with the Connecticut Environmental Protection, Energy and Environmental Protection. I supervise the North Central District, which incorporates Brook. And I'm just here to answer any questions that you may have regarding regulatory issues, compliance issues regarding the plan that's been by UTC.
I remember that. How you doing? My name is Bill Penn. I work at UTC in our remediation group, and we oversee the remediation function for all our business units. So we have a centralized function that does that. So even though this is a Hamilton Sunstrand/UTOS site, the work is managed through our group, through the corporate office. That's why the acronyms make it a little complicated at times, UTC, UTOS, but I work at UTC, but it is a Utah site that I'm representing here.
Now, Bill, yeah, thank you. Thank you for both being here. Bill, before we start, we wanted to ask, did you want to start by saying anything?
Yeah, I think I would. So I have a statement
Yes.
or something to go through. I'd like to start off with that. So it's written down, so I don't want to forget anything. First, I want to say good evening, everybody. And
Bill, if you want, you could stand over here so people will be able to
Oh,
thank
okay.
you back.
Thank you, Tom. Good idea.
That would be, I mean, we can hear you, or you can sit here.
Well, good evening. Thank you, everybody, for showing up tonight and expressing interest. And I thank the committee. As Jessica mentioned, we've been attending meetings for a while, and also the selectmen. I've been talking about for a long time, and I appreciate the opportunity to address you tonight. I'm going to walk you through our remediation plan for the Brook mill site, but first I'd like to highlight a few key points about it. One of the key points is our primary goal has and always been remains to implement a remediation plan that meets all regulatory requirements and is protective of people and the environment. When you look at the criteria when you're evaluating remediation, those are the two primary requirements in any remediation plan that has to be satisfied. And that is our goal. Our current remedial plan was developed and has evolved under the supervision of two regulatory agencies, both the Connecticut Deep as well as the U.S. EPA. All of our work is submitted to them, and they give comment on it. And our plan reflects their comments, as well as the first point about being protective and obeying regulations. Our remediation plan is not innovative in the sense that it's not something new or surprising. It uses an approach that has been successfully employed throughout Connecticut and throughout the country at many hundreds of sites. So it's not something that's off the wall, or let's experiment and try this. It's something that's these remedies are proven and true to satisfy those criteria. Our plan also allows for redevelopment of the property. So I know heard the concern expressed earlier about that. That's something that is of interest, and our plan does allow for that. We share the interest of the town and its residents in seeing this property reused in the future. Hamilton Sunstrand does not have an identified use for this site in its business plan, and will continue to invite offers to acquire or redevelop the property. There have not been any serious expressions of interest to date, but if through your Economic Development Commission or there's anything that comes up, we would welcome hearing about them. And some of you may, based on the history, the town was offered the property several years ago. I think it was back in the early 2000s. It predates my involvement, but my understanding was it was offered to the town, and through a town referendum or a vote or something of the sort, it was declined to take ownership or to reuse the property. Is my understanding. The town this committee recently asked us to consider changing the remediation plan to remove the consolidation area. In consideration with our environmental consultants, we went back and compared the current remedy to the town's requested one. After giving a careful consideration, we do not believe that removing additional soil is necessary at the site to ensure our shared goal of protecting the residents of East Windsor and the environment. In our experience, the proposed remedy will not deter sophisticated buyers or developers from acquiring the property or redeveloping it. Brownfield sites comprise a large number of commercial sites that are on the market today. And there are a number of brownfield sites that have been redeveloped throughout the state and throughout the country. We are anxious to get the remediation underway so that we can move closer to the day when the property can be redeveloped and put into good use. So the plan, the remediation plan. The primary goal of our plan is to protect people and the environment. We designed the plan based on the consideration of all the factors in the Connecticut Deep regulations, as well as the site-specific conditions of the property. Our remedial approach is based on widely accepted best practices that have proven to be effective at similar sites around the country and here in Connecticut for decades. As far as timeline, our remediation is anticipated to begin in early 2019 and conclude that same year. The remediation plans, which have been developed under the supervision and concurrence of Connecticut Deep and the US EPA, include installing a soil cap to prevent exposure to contaminated soil, spot removal of contaminated soil, on-site treatment of soil, and groundwater monitoring to measure the effectiveness of the program. A cap of clean soil up to 2 feet in thickness will be installed across the majority of the former mill property. The cap will prevent people from coming in contact with contaminated materials. This includes both the orphan share of materials from the former operations of the mill, as well as the former Hamilton operations. The area where the historic landfill was will be used to consolidate some soils excavated across the site. No soils contaminated with volatile organic compounds, VOCs, will be consolidated in this area. Those excavated soils, in accordance with state requirements, will be sent off-site for proper disposal. The smaller area of consolidation area is within the footprint of the site-wide soil cap. It will first be covered by an impermeable barrier to prevent water from seeping down through the consolidated soils. The area will then be covered with a soil cap similar to the rest of the site. As I mentioned, soils with elevated concentrations of VOCs will be excavated and disposed of off-site in accordance with state regulations. Excavations will also include removal of contaminated sediments from the edge of the brook, soils with other compounds present, which includes semi-volatile compounds, metals, and petroleum hydrocarbons can be safely consolidated in the historic landfill area under the cap. In addition to these measures, a process known as bioremediation will be used to clean up on-site soils. Oxygen-releasing compounds will be manually mixed in with the site soils before the cap installation, which will actively treat the soil contaminants in select areas of the site. The oxygen released during the chemical treatment encourages naturally occurring microbes to consume or break down the soil contaminants at a more rapid pace. According to the EPA, quote, bioremediation has successfully cleaned up many polluted sites and has been selected or is being used at over 100 Superfund sites across the country. Following remediation, the groundwater monitoring program will track the concentration of groundwater contaminants as they are degraded by natural biological processes and after the removal of the soils that will be sent off-site. So in a nutshell, that is a concise summary of our remediation plan for the site. Thank you.
Thank you. For folks that want to see the remediation action plan, the final one that's put in place, how can people look at the full documentation?
I believe you guys have a copy if you want to post it on your, post it on your website. If people, I'll have a sheet later on that will have my email address. I don't know if but people can also contact me and I can have that directed to people. I can have my consultant direct that to you because it's probably easy for him. He's more IT savvy than I am to to get that stuff out, but it can be a large document, so we, you had no problem downloading it?
Well, it took a little while to download it, but will it be available on the Deep site? The other plan, I believe, is up there. Will this one be available on the Deep site in a way that people can easily see it?
I can't answer that question, I don't know. In many situations, we do request that a copy of the remedial plan be located at the local library, so there's easier public access.
Oh, sure, we could certainly
Yeah.
accommodate that also.
That would be perfect, and
Okay.
and we do have it, so we can put it on the town website for anyone who wants to look at all the numbers and figures. There's like 153 pages of figures that folks can look at. All right. We can open up our discussion. Keith?
Bill, don't take anything I'm going to say with my first comments the wrong way, because you've been coming to our meetings. We've had great conversation, and you've been a great source of information and feedback. And I want to tie this into what one of the selectmen said, Jason Bowles said earlier. I want to try to tie a few things together here. I thought, and I think all the members here of the committee thought, that we were going to have a dialogue tonight where we town hired consultants. We've been asking some very detailed questions, expressing our concerns, sharing our concerns with the Board of Selectmen and the public. And I came here, I know all of us came here because we've had meetings to discuss preparing for tonight to have a dialogue. And then when you came, when Jessica introduced the representatives from UTC, and then you're the only one that came and sat down, I figured, Bill, since previously you've told us you're not the decision maker, you're the person on the ground that's the engineer, you told us explicitly you don't make decisions, so I figured somebody authorized you to come here tonight and have a dialogue with us about these issues. But then the statement you just read said that, and I'm sure that there could not have been any consideration of our consultant feedback or questions. We're not going to have any dialogue tonight, perhaps, on this issue. In fact, tonight's dialogue is apparently going to be us letting the public know what the concerns are, because we've asked for, at a minimum, that the consolidation area, we have a discussion about that, and the decision was already made before we got here tonight. And Jason had said, he asked a question, he's asked it at a lot of meetings. A lot of Board of Selectmen generally have asked the same question. Bob has, and Charlie has, and Andy has, but Jason's been very pointed about this at meetings. He said tonight, we've been asking for years for UTAS and UTC to come to the meetings and to give us updates. And we were actually quite surprised, not surprised, but pleasantly surprised that Bill, and there was actually another meeting where we had several members from UTAS, and we've had ACOM come. ACOM is absent tonight. That's interesting, because ACOM is the organization who's charged with developing this plan and doing the testing. So I'm sitting here asking the question, not the question isn't what are we going to do here tonight, because quite frankly what we should be doing is informing the public about the concerns, what our consultants have done, and I think we have some questions for Deep that we can ask. But I'm sitting here wondering, is it that the representatives didn't want to come because they did not want to engage in a dialogue? And why aren't they here tonight to have this conversation about particularly the consolidation area? And it makes me wondering if they don't care, they think that Deep is going to rubber stamp everything that they ask for because it fits within the minimum criteria. They don't care about Brook because they don't care about the fact that we have a contaminated site and they want to consolidate the contamination. Or are they afraid to have a public conversation about the concerns? And I think it's the latter. I think it's the latter, because there's no reason that they had to put Bill come here tonight. I feel badly because I'm saying this, but there's no reason that UTC had to send him to come here tonight by himself to deliver that message. They didn't have to do that to him. They didn't have to do that to us.
Well, if I can interject, first of all, I think you're being fair, first of all. My understanding was, you had put us, put the question to us about the consolidation area. And that was put out, 2 months ago. So over that time frame, there have been a lot of internal discussions. We've had many people involved in many conversations about this. And so we talked about it. I relayed your comments, that's why I came to the meetings, to understand, to reflect, to understand your comments, whether they're just perceived or real, or some of the interpretations of things and the effects of the remediation. So we had many serious, long, heartfelt discussions about this.
Good.
So I thought the idea was we were going to come here and, basically you wanted to hear what our feedback was. And that was our feedback. We looked at your idea. We said we don't see, looking at some of the key considerations. Hey, as I mentioned before, in doing any remedy, protective of people and the environment is at the top of the list. And then following the regulations, that's, they're kind of like parallel, they're in tandem there. And then we the other thing to me, in looking at the town, and I've heard that expressed by citizens here, was redevelopment of the property. I mean, our issues have evolved from early on. I remember some of the initial discussions, even with some people like here, we don't want anything here to then everything just became focused on this consolidation area. And the feeling was the consolidation area was truly going to inhibit future redevelopment of the property. And we had many discussions about that. Well, looking at things like, in Waterbury and Ockham Park in Norwich and other places where that's just not, and that's just the case. Let alone hundreds of places, brownfields around the country where that is not the case.
Bill, what's the cost? We've asked every meeting.
Every meeting we've asked the cost.
And that must, before you answer, and must have been one of the things you discussed.
Sure.
You must have, we've asked for the information, and we've asked you repeatedly to bring it, we asked you to bring it here tonight. What is the cost for the removal of the material? What is the cost to engineer and to put into place the consolidation site? And what is the delta? Tell us what you determined is the cost.
Well, it's not just driven by cost
But what is
alone.
what is the cost though? What is the cost?
There are many factors, and that's just one of them. When considering a remedy, for example, cost was the same. Trucking something off-site, sending something with potential fugitive dust on trucks, going through residential neighborhoods, going down the highways. Cost is just one of many factors. So
what is the cost? Could I just ask, you determined the cost, we asked you to calculate it, you must have had an internal conversation, because that is it. It is a cost factor. We asked for the cost. What did UTAS determine is the cost? The cost to remove the material, the cost to do the engineering and construct a consolidation site, and the delta. Let me ask you, was that one of the factors that you considered internally?
if you look at any remedy, cost is one of
So what's the cost that we asked for? Can we ask that question tonight? Can you tell us here tonight? What are those dollars?
Bill, I asked that question
I know.
5 weeks ago,
Well,
and you were going to get it for us.
And we're still, the cost is not finalized. We're going through final design now. Actually, the gentleman from CMG, in their comments, made some comments about things that are reflective of going through the design process more. Some of your questions were more things that wouldn't be fleshed out in a conceptual design, but as we go through the final design, we will have answers to some of those questions. So some of those costs aren't necessarily nailed down now as we're going through this process.
Bill, what's the approximate cost? What did you do internally in terms of coming up with the cost estimates in your calculation?
When will it be available? Never?
At some point, we'll have an idea of cost. We're working on it. As I said, we're going through final design. We have even gone through our public informational meeting.
But you're presenting tonight a decision to put the consolidation site in there, saying you weighed all the factors. The primary factors, we all know, because we've had meetings on this, and you can disagree, not you personally, I don't mean you, anything is not directed at you, Bill, personally. The company can disagree and say there's all these other factors, but everyone knows it's the cost. It's how much it's going to cost to take this stuff off-site. You're going to put it in a truck and deliver it to a approved landfill, or you're going to dump it on site. So if there's an internal discussion, what's the approximate costs for these things? You must know what the cost is to do to engineer and to build the consolidation site. That had to be calculated as part of the remediation plan.
Now, a part of our original meeting, when we set this meeting out, was to invite members of the select board to be able to ask questions, so I want to acknowledge that Jason wants to.
I just want to follow up on Keith's point, and at the risk of being pointed again, one of the reasons, the predominant reason why I was asking for several years for this meeting to happen ahead of the plan being submitted to DEEP for consideration was out of concern that what UTC or UTAS was putting forward was in the best interest of UTC and UTAS, and not in the best interest of the taxpayers of East Windsor.
And that's exactly
what's happening. That gets to Keith's point about, just acknowledging what the cost is versus trying to dance around whether cost is a consideration or not a consideration. Of course, cost is a consideration, but we have a very different priority than what a Fortune 500 company does, maybe Fortune 100 company. I don't mean, you guys are huge. That's what the urgency of asking the question for those preliminary conversations over the last several years to happen in public that didn't happen. And now, also to Keith's point, we're being presented with here's what the plan is. Not, does this plan meet what the needs of the community are?
Well, may I just say something first that,
Yes.
no, I would like to move over there so my back isn't toward you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
We're not throwing things.
Yeah, I was going to give you a chair.
Bill, if you want, you can come around the corner too, so you're not,
Okay.
so you're not in the same situation. They're not gonna throw things.
I'm gonna have,
Are you done, Jason?
Yeah, well,
I
I'd
think,
like, if there's any follow-up to that, I'd appreciate it.
I just want to, Rob, did you want to say something, or did you just
Oh,
want to
no, I
go
just
over?
wanted
Okay.
permission to move.
Oh,
Permission granted. Tom?
Rob, on your tip, can we have your take on that? What is the consider that consolidation area? Do they consider that more of a hazard to move it? Or what? I mean, that's what they're saying, and I want to know what Deep's theory on that is.
Their plan,
Or if cost is just the fine.
the cost is up to
Them, obviously.
right. Their plan does meet the standards. It is acceptable to the department. So I can say that.
Now,
If they want to move it off-site, that's also acceptable.
But is it your take that it's still a hazard to move that consolidated area?
If they actually truck it and move it off-site? Well, as Bill was saying, there's always all kinds of variables in terms of diffusion of dust, traffic. That's an accident.
That's how it got here, though.
We move it by rail, we move it by truck, we move fertilizers, we move hundreds of millions of tons of contaminated product through the rails, the roads, the ships, the ports, everything in this country every single day. We're talking about a very limited amount of highly contaminated soil in a village center on a plot of land that deals with the village psyche and the history of this community. And it's important to this community that we get this right. And unfortunately, the state of Connecticut picking up the open share and UTC being expected to pick up their share and do the right thing, falls on them to do that, regardless of what the minimum criteria is.
You know, I appreciate that, and I want to just make clear that as a representative of the department, I'm not here to defend the plan. I'm here to ensure the public that the plan as presented, and as we've already issued a letter of concurrence, that it is protective of human health and it does meet the standards as it has been proposed. So,
Bob, our consultants went into the entire plan and looked for the engineering for the consolidation cap. And they basically found there's little to no detail about the cap. That cap is in an area that we know that Main Street has flooded historically. There have been several huge floods from the mill pond that have flooded that entire area. We also know that it's right above the subsurface groundwater area. Our engineer is concerned about the effect of increase in the groundwater rising, but there's no detail in the plan. They don't tell us how they're going to do the engineering for it, how they're going to stabilize the sides. Basically, they say the words that we heard tonight. They're going to put an impervious cap and cover it with 2 feet. How is DEEP able to approve a proposal when there's virtually no detail in the plan for the engineering for that proposal?
That's a very good question. And it's a two-phased approach. With this kind of engineering approach, first of all, we want the concept. It's called the Part 1 application. And so we have the plan. This is what we intend to do. This is the whole concept of everything. And yes, and so that's what we're looking at. Does it have merit? Does it make sense? Does it meet the criteria of the RSRs? Once we issue that approval, we have that concurrence, and then there is some discussion on all the details and the public concerns, this and that, then we will expect that final detailed design for our final approval.
Bob, the concern is that the UTAS is going to present this to the public as part of the required process. Right. They have to present the plan. Right. The plan that's going to come to the public is going to have virtually no detail on the consolidation. Is going to have the concept. After the concept is approved by DEEP, and after all the public input, the public has no say any longer in making sure that the engineering is done to protect the town. In fact, at one of our meetings, well, you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I thought once it's approved, that after the public hearing, the town has no right to participate. We were told at one of our meetings that if it floods, then it'll be taken care of. Now, and we were worried if that consolidation area floods, or there's contamination from that, or animals bore through it, or there's something, and the contaminated soil spread across the property into the brook, who's going to take care of it? And as a follow-up question, the engineers identified that the original plan was to, I'm speaking out of turn, or
No, yep.
The original plan was to put a 4-foot cap of soil on the site, because 4 feet, it turns out, is the proper amount of soil that needs to be placed on the site. There's an exception, as we've been advised by our experts, that 2 feet is permissible if there's an impervious barrier there. So they need a variance in order to be able to go to 2 feet, as everybody here knows. Right. No variance has been approved. There's no way to put impervious on 8 acres of land. And then we learned that the 4 feet the reason that the 4 feet was rejected is because it's going to cause flooding, because that is a low-lying area. And if that had 4 feet of increased elevation, when that floods occur, it's going to flood all the properties downstream from that brook. You're going to get enormous flooding down along that Ellington Road, and all those properties and homeowners in that area are going to get flooded because of 4 feet. So then they reduced it 2 feet, but no variance, no impervious cap is, no impervious is part of the plan, and we've asked for the data about flooding for 2 feet. Because if 4 feet is rejected because it's going to cause enormous flooding, that doesn't mean 2 feet won't. How does DEEP approve a plan that has no data for flooding, no variance, no data supporting a variance, and is it the same concept that someone said, that DEEP says, these are concepts, we're approving concepts, and down the road they'll come in with the engineering that's going to prove that their concepts are viable. Shouldn't we have the engineering up front that the public can question and ask these questions, and DEEP can then, so when DEEP says we've decided it's acceptable, is that acceptable concepts or acceptable engineering?
You asked a lot of questions there. I got lost.
But you know the answers, or you should, I mean,
I forgot what you said the first time. Again, this is concept, and this is another purpose of the public meeting, is to draw out these concerns and questions so that they can be incorporated or addressed in some manner
Good.
in designing that final detailed plan. That's the whole purpose of this.
So questions would be, did they approve a variance to go to 2 feet? Because they approved 2 feet, but they didn't approve the variance.
We have issued a letter of concurrence that that would be appropriate
With the variance, though.
with the land use restriction.
With the variance. They have to.
Well, the whole thing's called a variance.
Okay, yeah, so with the land, so do they have does DEEP consider the engineering for the land use restriction before it gave approval? Did it look at the engineering?
We have not issued formal approval of the plan yet.
Okay.
Again, that's the second phase of this process. The first phase is we have this initial plan, this concept, and to move forward with a detailed plan, they need to be, they need confirmation that that plan is going to be acceptable, at least the concept of that plan.
So
And once we agree with that, that's going to meet, if it's done accordingly or properly, and they have all the right details, yes, that would work. Any comments? Okay, incorporate those comments if it's appropriate. Okay, now go finish up the plan and give us the finite details so that we can do a formal technical review and issue approval.
How could,
Can I ask a question?
Well, hold on one second, let me finish. I'm trying to understand the process, of course, because we've never been through this before in this town with this type of issue, as far as I know, other than the other site that there was a waste site. How does DEEP give its approval of concepts when it hasn't seen the engineering? Are you assuming that a variance can be given for a 2-foot cap, for example, because they simply asked for it? Don't they have to have some data to show that there's a reason for variance?
Yeah, we have the basic data to
Have they done that?
evaluate that.
Have they done that?
In this plan, there's no basis for a variance.
The file's full of the information, scientific information.
I think we have well, the report doesn't say anything about it. How would we know? How does the public know what the basis of?
If I can add one thing to help.
Sorry.
Real quick,
Oh, sorry.
these were the consultants that the town hired from CMG to review the plan and to give us some background information, just so everyone's aware.
I think where you're going with this, and I think it'll be helpful, and the concept portion of it, we, as a reviewer for the town and the committee, was looking at, this is going to be reliant upon, as indicated, some restrictions. They're called environmental land use restrictions. And with that, there'll be some conditions, there'll be some restrictions. That hasn't been really discussed yet in that, what are they, how will that affect the development? I think it's jumping ahead a little bit, but we didn't see that, so we pointed it out. And some of our discussions that we wrote up was to point that out. Our job was to point out and bring to light some possible questions and educate the committee as much as we can based on what we have to review. So a lot of what we ended up concluding was, in a nutshell, was this environmental land use restriction. Just what is it? How is it going to restrict access, future use, developability of the property, ongoing maintenance issues. We're talking, in perpetuity. And then we get the details, like, the financial end of it and the maintenance and oversight of it. Who maintains this oversight in the future, 50, 100 years? Again, it's a perpetuity. So we didn't have that information, and we had spent a lot of time in meetings prior to this discussing some of those aspects. And it does sound, what I'm getting now that I didn't have prior to this meeting, was that we're more at the concept phase. So it's good to know that it's in concept, in my opinion, based on a committee, because that means there's room for discussions and further talks about what these use restrictions, because ultimately, at the end of the day, I think that's what's most important to the town is, what are these restrictions going to be? How are they going to affect it? The usability, how is it going to affect both private, public, purchase, availability of the property. And we don't have that detail yet, and maybe from hearing this, it's that, you know, that's forthcoming.
But it's a little frightening.
But it's late. We should have that information now so that proper decisions can be made now. If it goes downstream farther, it's going to be too late.
Well, for example, though, it's like using the engineer control and the 2-foot variance. They're required then to place a land use restriction. And this is going to be for controlling direct exposure, the human contact to the soils. So, and we call that direct exposure criteria. And so the land use restriction is really to ensure that those measures, that cap, remains in place and the integrity remains in place.
But Bob, the land, a restriction.
And that's what the restriction is.
Yeah, a good restriction would be you're going to put a fence around it in perpetuity, and no one gets to go on that property again, and no one can develop that property.
Not all restrictions require a fence.
But that could be the restriction. But we're talking about having a contaminated, a site contaminated with carcinogens, sitting in the middle of Broad Brook, Connecticut, Eastminster, Connecticut, forever. And the plan is to dig it out in one area on that site, or multiple areas, to dig it out of the ground from all different spots, chromium, arsenic, lead, okay, all kinds of heavy metal carcinogens, to dig it up and to put it in a truck and to drive it over 100 yards and to dump it on the same site. And that's, you know, you can put a land use restriction on that and say you're going to put a fence around that in perpetuity. That's creating that is leaving the contaminated site in Broad Brook. Now, if Deep feels that that's appropriate and it meets minimum criteria, then that's not your fault. That's the state of Connecticut's fault for allowing for that condition. That's awful that anyone would say that you can have a contaminated site with carcinogens and all you have to do is bury them on the site and cover it, either with soil or with a tarp or both, and you get to walk away from it. And the state of Connecticut has an orphan share here. The state of Connecticut is responsible for this cleanup as much as Utah's is, not Deep is it, because it's the state has a separate agreement. Where's the state of Connecticut in terms of sitting with us and partnering with us to say, we don't want to leave a contaminated site in Broad Brook. We don't want to leave these carcinogens behind. We're not going to dump them and run. The state of Connecticut signed off on this. They agree. So, you know, you call it ELUR, the land use restriction. I think Andy's right. Is it too late? If the plan comes in, put a fence around it and walk away from it, pay for monitoring in perpetuity, who's going to escrow that money? Who's going to put, how much money is it going to take to escrow in perpetuity monitoring of this site?
As opposed to making it a usable site that is, you can sell, UTC can sell, and will bring taxes to the town of East Windsor. You people don't have the same motivation that we have. And I'm really disappointed in UTC. You don't care about what happens.
We're looking for the cheap way out. We're looking for the cheap way out again.
Yeah, it's all about money, Bill. It really is all about money. You know, one of the early meetings we had, a Deep representative was there. And I asked the very question, if that land is left with a consolidation pile, what are the restrictions on it? And the answer was, we don't really know that, but there'll be restrictions. That won't bring a developer in. We'll never get a developer in. You gotta clean it up, or we're gonna be stuck with a dump site forever and ever. That's a long time.
And I think you can understand where we're coming from when we're presented with a concept, only to find out later what the actual restrictions will be. It's like saying, you know, we're going to put you in a room, but we're not going to tell you until you're already in the room that the doors are locked, the windows are barred, and there's no escape from it. I think it's very reasonable for us to want to know what would be in that ELUR? What is that gonna look like? How is that gonna affect us? So that we can give the proper comment back on that is not acceptable because it doesn't allow us to do our due diligence, working with economic development to find a buyer or someone who wants to redevelop this.
You're treating us like mushrooms, and that's wrong.
The land use restriction is, again, associated with the land. It is recorded on the land records. And that's what makes it legal. But it also has to come before the department for review, for applicability, that it meets all the requirements. And after the commissioner approves that, then it's recorded by the property owner on the land records. And in some situations, not for the restriction, but for the reason why the restriction is recorded, sometimes that requires a financial surety placed. So there is the ongoing, kind of like an escrow, so there's an ongoing maintenance and monitoring of that specific condition of the cap or whatever it may be. So it's not a situation where they fence, they record, and then they walk away with no further responsibilities. And I think I recall that there was I feel like I'm defending the plan now, and I really don't want to go there. But just in terms of long-term responsibility, I think with the cap, there was a 5-year requirement to come back and sample the progress of the enhanced bioremediation of the soils, just to keep monitoring the effectiveness of that, and if it's actually doing what it was intended to do. If it doesn't, well then, there may have other considerations to follow.
Do you know that it's right adjacent to a church? There are apartments there and there's a restaurant there? Do you care about that?
Yes, we do. That's why these
you don't
measures,
have to.
That's why these measures, we ensure that these measures mitigate direct contact to the soils. That's why we accept burying, so to speak, covering them with the 2 feet of fill. That eliminates the direct exposure contact.
Spelled money.
I want to acknowledge, I've seen a couple of hands, so I want to, we said that our board of selectmen would have the opportunity to ask questions, so I'll start with Charlie.
Yeah, I've got a few questions. One, I am extremely disappointed with what's been brought forth here tonight. Not at all what I expected. I'm very angry about that. And people have worked hard and this didn't come as was thought. Question I have is, when did the state of Connecticut issue a hazardous toxic waste dump permit?
No, we didn't issue any permit.
What's that?
We did not issue any permit.
Then how can you build a dump without a permit?
Please clarify what you mean by a dump.
1,300 yards.
You're going to dig it out, and you're going to dump it.
They're moving it from
You're
one
not taking
location
it
to
with
another on the
in
same
a
site.
box. You're going to dump it. That's a dump.
In the center of the village of Broadbrook.
Get rid of 1,300 yards out of town.
So
We'll be
when
satisfied.
did they issue a permit?
Well, see, we don't consider it the same way that you do. That's a soil reuse issue that's stated
Aha,
on the site.
aha. It is a dump. It's a toxic waste dump that you're building. That's what you want to do. That's one question I have. You made mention about, within this plan, that there would be groundwater monitoring, right? When you find that stuff in the water, it's too late. You can't stop it. You can't turn it off. You can't back it up. There's no valve. So it's pointless to do that. That's why it's got to be taken out. Another question I have is, in the state of Connecticut, are there and have there been any impermeable covers that have been put in for situations that have failed?
Not to my personal knowledge.
I suggest that you do some research about that.
Mr. Maynard?
Yeah, I think getting back to the one focus here is the consolidation area. And it's actually defined as 1,300 cubic yards, I guess. So that's, we know exactly how much volume is there. And as many people have pointed out, I guess the procedure is to dig it up from various places where there's volatile chemicals and put it maybe in a hole that you dig and cover it with an impermeable barrier. And what many people have asked, and people have asked here, and I don't have an answer for it, so I'm kind of asking you for an answer. They're saying, well, if you're going to dig it up and put it in trucks, why can't you haul it out of here? And I don't have an answer for that.
Dollars.
But is that your, what would you say? How would I answer a person and say, well, they've got it in a truck, they're just going to put it in a consolidation area? What's the answer to why you don't?
Because it's cheaper to haul it 30 feet than it is to haul
I'd
it.
like them to answer it.
Well, I answered that previously. It's the cost is one of the many factors. We feel there's other risks associated with hauling more materials off-site, having dozens of trucks go through residential streets on a daily basis, and there's no additional protection of human health or the environment by doing that. I mean, there's less by having it move off-site and doing that. So, you know, the whole site is going to have, most of the site is going to have a land use restriction because the cap covers all the historic mill operations materials that are distributed throughout the site that has similar compounds that are going underneath the cap. So we have our impermeable cap. The reason some soils are going off-site is because they have to for regulatory reasons. These other soils are compatible and protected by being put under that cap. We selected an area of the cap specifically because it was removed from the 100-year floodplain area. It's also in a little niche or corner of the site that is probably least developable when you think of developing a site and having restrictions or boundaries and stuff like that. It's in an area of the site that's going to need some fill brought in anyway because of contouring it in place to make the cap meet the proper geometry, I guess is the right word. So that's why that area was selected. And again, people make allusions to redevelopment, but you can go to Waterbury, the Chase DeGrasse Mill area. That is a former brownfield site that has a cap on it. You go to Meriden Hub. They have a 1 foot soil cap over the Meriden Hub area. You go to the
just 1 foot of soil.
That's my understanding.
There's no impervious barrier. There's no pavement. There's 1 foot of soil over it.
Correct.
Then what's under it?
I don't know the details. I'm sorry. I don't know the specifics of the site.
Unless you know what the contaminants were, then they're apples and oranges.
I got to be honest. I was very disappointed that your consultant did not show up tonight. I thought we were going to be able to have a conversation with your consultant, with discussion with our consultant and some of the concerns that we have. And I'm kind of disappointed that they didn't show up so we could have that. I mean, they've been at our other meetings. I don't know why they didn't show up tonight. We were prepared to have that conversation. This is our special meeting, but it's our meeting. It's not the public information meeting. It's our meeting, and for the public to understand kind of what we've been doing and to hear this, but it's really disappointing. And your statement that I thought we were making a little progress at our meetings, and you pretty much put a cap, so to speak, on that with the statement that you made, that you just aren't going to move it. It's not in your best interest, and I'm convinced it's dollars, and we've been asking for the cost differential since our first meeting. I just don't understand. You know how much it costs to move that material from point A to point B. It's 1,300 cubic yards. It's not that many trucks. I just can't believe that we can't get that information. I'm disappointed, very disappointed.
Jason?
So I have a question for each of you gentlemen. Who wants to go first? Mr. Penn, I'll start with you. So the question keeps coming up around cost, and we can't get a clear answer on that. Can we at least get an acknowledgement that it is cheaper for UTC not to take the soil off the property?
Yes.
I don't know. Answer or not?
I don't know, I mean, like Mr. Robinson alluded to, we have to put up financial assurance, we have to take care of the long-term O&M of that site. If the site gets sold, that's part of a negotiation with the new owner possibly, who has responsibility for that. That's part of the give and take of a business developer business decisions. Hopefully I don't get involved with those. But given a long-term cost, I don't know if that's a fair statement when you look at what was talked about in perpetuity and having to care for that.
Okay, so when I talk to constituents who have concerns about this, my response is going to be that UTC would not confirm that it is more costly to remove the soil than not.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. You're from Deep?
Yes.
Robinson. Mr. Robinson?
Yes.
What is the remedy for the town when the town makes the determination that the town's best interests have not been considered by Deep or UTC? Is it litigation?
Yes.
Thank you.
Jason, Jessica, could I just follow up on Jason for 1 second?
Yes.
Oh. Jason, you got a response, which was they can't tell us
I'm satisfied with both my responses.
Well, I want to comment on their response, because basically they say we can't tell you whether it'll cost more or less because they're looking at the long-term cost to maintain it. Now, if it turns out the cost is similar, or the cost is more to put that there, to leave that dump there, as Charlie says, that's even more upsetting to me, because if they're doing it to save money from a business perspective, I don't have to agree with that. We don't have, as a town, to have to agree with that, but at least we can understand it's a business decision, okay? If it turns out the cost is similar or the same, and they've made a business decision to leave the contaminants in our town, that's not a business decision anymore. That's almost like a moral decision. That's basically saying we're going to leave the contaminants in Brook rather than remove it because we can. And if it's not cost that's driving this, then there's a different issue here that is not business driven. It's a problem about the company's willingness to consider the safety and the concerns of this town. And people, they talk around it. We've had a lot of these meetings. They talk around, it's safe because it's buried under 2 feet of soil. It's safe because it's under a tarp. That's not safe into perpetuity. That's safe for the time being until the flood comes and washes all that stuff down into the streams. What's going to happen when the flood takes out that site the next time the mill pond floods and it takes out that entire 1,300 yards and washes it across the site into that brook and downstream? Who's going to clean up all those properties that are downstream? And by the way, with the 2-foot additional cap on there, on the entire property, now that flooding is going to go everywhere. Who's going to clean that mess up? Nobody. We're going to have to live with it, just like you have to live with the contaminated water in this town. And by the way, Charlie, the plume is already there.
Yeah.
The plume is there. They know it's there. They're measuring it to see how far it distributes. And you know what their answer is by stopping further, by degrading the VOCs, the plume will, it's going to dissipate, which means it's going to spread into the water.
The solution to pollution is dilution.
Right. They're going to dilute the contaminants in the water that are in our aquifer. Now listen, that's historic. We can't stop that. But they have a responsibility to take it off site now, to clean it up. And they are doing that with some of the VOCs. I don't understand it. If it's a regulatory reason to take out the volatile compounds, why isn't it a regulatory thing to take out the carcinogens, like the chromiums? And again, if the cost is the same, Jessica, if it turns out, and this is not a money decision, I don't know how this community is going to be able to face that.
Not to mention the fact that there's $3.9 million based on the original consent order and deferral agreement. I forget which one had the number. There's $3.9 million of the state's money involved in that. From a previous meeting, we learned that there's about $1 million plus left. So where has the other 2-something million gone? And what is the remaining 1 point whatever million dollars being used for in the project?
It could be used to get this material off-site. That's a lot of money.
Yes, there was an original 3.9.
That's what it was in the...
Right. And again, this was, you had asked the gentleman there at the end, I can't remember your name, I'm sorry.
Paul Anderson.
Said something about the money.
Yeah.
And that whole thing came about because, and the issuance of the order to UTAS, or Hamilton Century, I guess it was, so the site would become a Superfund site. This was in coordination with EPA, and so we agreed, everybody agreed that the state would step up and put these funds forward, using state money, to keep it off the Superfund list. That was the benefit of the town.
Why?
The benefit of the town.
If it was
Nobody wants a Superfund
If
site.
it was Superfund, they would have cleaned it up. If it was a Superfund site, that you would have been,
Well,
UTAS would have been forced to clean up the contaminants.
It's not to discuss that now.
It's not to the town's, but Bob, it's not to the town's, it was not to the town's benefit for the state to step up and put that money up to prevent it from being a Superfund site, because this site would have been cleaned up. That would have been the requirement. The state, who has an orphan share, saves money. The state is saving money on this project by doing what they did. Because their orphan share, they can leave that contamination on the property. UTAS benefits from what happens.
We are subjected to the cleanup standards just like any business.
You're monitoring, the state's monitoring its own standards. DEEP is approving the standards for the orphan share. I'm just pointing out, you said that all this money was put in to stop it from being Superfund.
That's a misperception, and I'm sorry you have that perception, but
Superfund,
it's not like the fox watching the hen house here.
No, I was just making a point. I wasn't saying anyone was doing anything wrong. I wasn't implying that DEEP was not doing its job. I want to make that clear. I wasn't saying that DEEP is not doing its job on account of the state is a responsible party. I think that DEEP is doing its job. I think that the standards are so low, perhaps, in terms of doing its job to protect our town in particular. And I think that, again, going back to the issue, if the state is approving a concept plan without the engineering, that to me is a deficit in terms of the approval process. So it wasn't making the hen is watching the chicken house thing.
Well, we have some level of engineering. We know what it's not just, oh, we're going to cap it. No, we do have some details on what that's going to entail. Otherwise, we wouldn't issue the letter of concurrence. And we do know, based on experience, professional experience and history, of what works, what doesn't, what's allowable under the RSRs. And so these things, these prerequisites and these requirements have to be met for us to even move forward.
Do you guys calculate the removal process?
I'm sorry?
Do you calculate the removal process at all, or just kind of?
The cost?
Yeah, just kind of rough estimate, kind of? Just kind of see if it coincides with what you're getting presented to?
No, because usually we don't care how much it costs if somebody has to dig and haul or perform any kind of remedial measure.
Right.
Yeah, that's their responsibility. As long as it meets the standards and it's protective of human health and the environment. That's our big mission here.
Right, and I appreciate your time. I'm just going to say one thing. It's kind of reiterate what Lenny said. I think this commission or committee, right from the get-go, is cost of consolidation, cost of removal. That's it. If it needs a motion, I'm all for it, whatever it is. That's what we're looking for from Mr. Penn and ACOM.
I thought we had a motion before.
We had a motion.
Well, if that's what it takes, because I think that's the bottom line, and if I want to speak for the town, if it's 1 million to 1.5, I think this town would pitch in. I think we'd be, everybody would chip in.
But there's $1 million someplace.
Well,
We should know where it is and what it's usable for.
I agree.
Where's the spend so far?
Let's
Where's
get a
been
cost
the spend so
analysis
far?
That's a good question.
And that's public information.
So we're beating it up. We're beating a dead horse.
No, it's not.
When you
I
spend,
do-
We're dragging it out.
Hold on a second.
The 3.9 million that the state kicked in, Where did the 2.8 go that they spent? I mean, did you give it to UTAS? Did you write a check to somebody? It went somewhere. Do you know? Someone must.
Well, I know what it was presented out to. The first third was for the investigation of the site. The second third is remedial design, if I'm correct. And the last installment is after they submit a final remediation report when everything is done. And then we'll go ahead and provide that last installment. And I believe it is paid, I'm guessing here, and presuming that I think I know what I'm talking about, that it is to the responsible party, because they're the ones that are doing the work.
So the state is doling out the money in thirds towards different parts.
Just to cover that, the orphan share, which was really the coal ash from the mill operation, which didn't have anything to do with UTC's operation.
And that's in conjunction with the...
So that's what we took responsibility for.
And that's in conjunction with the original investigation that the EPA did when it first started looking to this in '94 and '96 with a final report in '99, and the $300,000+ that UTC had to pay back to the EPA for that investigation?
I'm ignorant on that. I can't answer that question.
It's in the original consent, it's in all the original documentation.
Bob, do we know how
I've
much?
only been involved in this case for 3 months, I'm sorry.
Me too.
Bob, do we know how much UTAS, not the state of Connecticut, how much the owner of the property has put into any of this work?
I don't think I don't know that. It's not in the files.
Wouldn't somebody like to know if they've made a similar contribution? Because if this is about money,
well,
and
it's really irrelevant, because we were just paying to take care of that historical contamination from the mill operation.
right? But the chromium and the arsenic and a lot of these heavy metals are coming off of the areas where the coal ash is. Some of it's by the mill building, but a lot of it is coming off of the areas, not with the VOCs, but where the coal ash is, probably right within the orphan share, because when this building's burnt down, all of those tanks, besides they would dump on the property all of their heavy metals, but they also had tanks filled with heavy metals for different stripping purposes and all the rest. When the building's burnt down, all the heavy metals that were in those buildings and the vats and tanks burnt and went into the ground, right on top of the coal ash. But the state doesn't. You think that the state and the town should find out if UTAS has put any money into this project? Because we're asking them costs for remediation, and if there's $1.2 million left, and you're going to use that million, I think it's 1.2, Jessica. If they're going to use the 1 million plus now to do the remediation, I mean, wouldn't we like to know if they're chipping in some of their own money to do this? Because I mean, the consolidation area, we had estimates, Bob, from anywhere from $300,000 to hundreds of thousands of dollars to remove the 1.3 million, the 1,300 cubic yards. And then we don't know what the engineering is going to be for the consolidation area, but anybody, I mean, engineers figure it's at least a couple $100,000 because you have to build this, not just cap it, you have to engineer it, and then you have to get this impervious cap on there. So the delta can't be more than a couple $100,000 for 1,300 yards. And so we're worried about the dump site, as Charlie's calling it a dump site. And then, I mean, I get Deep doesn't care about the cost, but Utah should care about the town's needs, at least if it's a couple $100,000. If there's 1.2 million left, why can't they use that?
Right.
As a taxpayer, I care. You struck up a partnership with UTC. As a partner, wouldn't you want to know what your partner is going to kick in to something like this? I would.
I agree.
It just makes good sense that I would know what my partner is going to kick in. And if there's $1.2 million left, shouldn't it be applied to try to get the best deal we can for the town of East Windsor? Forget about what the minimum acceptable is. You got to put yourselves in our shoes. We don't want it there. We want to be able to develop that into something a park, an industrial site, into something, and currently, with the way it's gonna be, I can't see a developer coming anywhere near it, particularly based on what we were told by your representative the first night he showed up, and that is, there will be significant restrictions placed on what a developer can do. That's what scared me off.
Those restrictions also translate to a reduction in the assessed value of the property, not only at the site, but for surrounding and abutting landowners as well. And that's going to last in place the same amount of time that that impervious cap does. We have to think about what the cost to the community is.
But let's also be realistic here. This is a centuries-old facility and operations here. We can't dig everything out down to bedrock and haul it away. That's unrealistic. So there is going to be residuals here.
But we're not asking for that.
Forever. And so the best thing we can do here is try and deal with what we have, make sure that we're protective of human health and the environment. That's the goal. There are going to be some residuals.
Jason?
So I work for the Connecticut Department of Agriculture, and when we partner with whoever to do grants, they're always reimbursement grants. Do we have any surety that the money that's been paid out by DEEP or by the state or whoever's paying it out to UTC is actually for work that has been done for this?
Yes, there's checks and balances, and
is it a
my former staff, he was well into that. Regrettably, he's had to leave state business here, but so I have not had the opportunity to really delve into that kind of paperwork. But yes,
it's a reimbursement for work that's performed.
Those measures are in place. Yeah.
So it is a reimbursement.
That's my understanding. Yes.
Just going off of something that Jason had said a while ago, obviously you can tell from this discussion, you can tell from all these people out here, the town of East Windsor is not happy about this. And I'm not speaking on behalf of the board, I think the board has made themselves clear as well. Who do we contact to get our voices heard? Do we contact the Commissioner of DEEP? Do we contact you? Do we contact everyone and their cousin to let them know that we don't like this?
That's why I'm here. Contact me.
Contact you?
And actually, there will be, as we talked about public informational meeting, there will be a formal process to say, for comments, whatever, please contact. So there will be an established process or procedure about how to do that. And I don't know if you'll be the person who will be the person named in that process, but there will be something established when we have the public information.
But will the decisions already be made at that before that meeting?
No.
Okay.
We just have the concurrence letter right now, and then there'll be input on the meeting, and then there'll be different phases of approvals. Like I said, there's approval of the concept, and then there's a lot of details to be worked out. CMG posed some questions about some of those details, and that's a pretty standard procedures. You have a 20 up to maybe 30% design, which is the concept. There were some design drawings in the thing that showed actually what the impermeable, what the cap would be. This amount of fill. Here's the PVC. Here's the cap. Here's the materials underneath. And there were a couple of cross sections of that in the diagram as well. So I think there's a cross section of the standard cap that's going to cover the bulk of the site, the 6 acres or 5 acres. I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact extent. So, 30% design is what they're approving now, but there's additional approvals. There's approval for if it's 60, 90%, whatever the next stage is, and that's really the nitty-gritty, the engineering details. Okay, you have to comply with regulations. You can only have this much slope. You have to tie in the sides of it a certain way, and things like that. Those are the nitty-gritty details that select engineers really have the knowledge to comment on, critique on. Like these guys mentioned some of those, but those will be approved as well as the monitoring, the long-term monitoring. Rob mentioned, we'll be monitoring the cap to ensure that the integrity is maintained over time, that it's not disturbed as you know by animals or whatever. If something happens, it will be repaired. So the details of what that monitoring is, for example, the grass cap doesn't work well, if it doesn't have grass on it, So, you know, the first year, that monitoring frequency is a lot higher, because you want to make sure you get that grass established, et cetera, and take care of that. And then typically over time, once you have established a cap, materials have settled in place and things are going well, you tend to reduce that monitoring frequency. But that's part of the long-term plan, and that's something that DEEP will be involved with approving, that element. What is that? So if we say once a quarter for the first year, they could come back and say, no, you need to do once a month for the first year, and then you can come back to make sure everything is copacetic with the.
But Bill, the gentleman asked the question was at that meeting, is that when things are going to get approved?
Or beforehand.
Beforehand.
And then we get the information.
Well, you're talking about the 60% on the backside in terms of the engineering, but we don't care about engineering for things we don't want. Like, why do we care if you're doing engineering for the consolidation site that we don't want? We want to know when we show up at the meeting, I think that's what the gentleman's asking us, there's already a concurrence letter from DEEP.
Concurrence, but they haven't approved it yet.
The question that I think somebody asked is, who do we contact to change the concept? Not that we don't want to go to a meeting and have the concept put there and have public input on the concept that's there. We want to change the concept. We want DEEP to look at our reasons for changing the concept. The 60% engineering on the backside on a bad concept is not useful for us.
It's wasteful of the money.
Right. Who do we contact to change the concept? If DEEP comes here tonight, I'm sorry, not DEEP, if UTAS comes here tonight and said, we've considered, even before this meeting, that we're not going to change the concept, which was really quite disappointing. And DEEP says, if they meet the minimum standards, they get their concept, and then they can come in with the engineering later. And Jason says, what, we have to file a lawsuit to affect this? And the answer is yes. But we don't want to do that right now. How do we change the concept before it even comes before the town? Who do we talk to about that? Can we go to the commissioner and say, this concept because we know there's residuals, but you didn't address the digging up and putting on a truck and redepositing it on the site. I mean, who do we ask to change that concept? That we are against digging up contaminated materials, putting it on a truck, hauling it 100 yards, and redumping it in Broadbrook.
If there's sufficient comment and concern, then there's the ability for an appeal process, and we would have a hearing.
An appeal? So how do we get, can we get you to consider that before we go to that meeting? Like, is this enough tonight for DEEP to say, this town has a problem with consolidation? They want to know the cost factors for if you're going to dig it up and haul it out. Is this enough tonight for DEEP?
Based on the 1,300 consolidation.
1,330 cubic yards.
Request a hearing.
Well, we'd like to know, how do we affect the concept before it goes to the public hearing? That's the question.
I'll have to check and get back to you on that.
Okay. Thank you.
So I just want to, I see a lot of hands going up. So I just want to acknowledge, for the purposes of the meeting, we did invite the select board members to be able to ask questions. So one of the reasons why I did ask, how do we talk, is I want to be respectful of the meeting format. So I see a lot of other hands going up, but we did invite the Board of Selectmen members to come and ask questions. So I'm going to focus on.
So we can't ask questions, is what you're saying? We as the public can't ask the question.
Or it's not proper. We have enough time, once if our commission members are done, or at least want to pause, and the board members are done, I think we could probably just see what happens with public comment, right? And then
Yeah. I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to have our board members go first. Yep.
I just have two questions. Well, the first one is 1,300 cubic yards. I'm not sure how many truckloads that is. And maybe, Lenny, you could tell me how many cubic yards can you put?
Probably 100.
100 truckloads?
Well, if you put a 10-yard, 60, between 70 and 100.
Okay, so like 10 yards in a truck, you think?
10, 15.
Okay.
Depends on what they're trucking it in.
All right. And my other thing is that earlier in this meeting, you said that you're going to start doing this. You're going to start implementing the remediation in early 2019, which is less than Wow. That's less than 6 months away. And I don't see how we can, just as Keith brought up, and that's a key thing, I don't think, it's like a freight train that we can't stop, and you're just gonna do what you're gonna do, and you say, yeah, we're gonna listen to you, but we're gonna do what you're gonna do. And so, I too think, what I'm getting out of it is we've gotta do something now, very much, to change the concept, or at least, and all we're asking for is 70 truckloads, that's all we're talking about here, but this is a big deal to us, and so that's what I want to say, but also, if we could, this is our economic development person, and he'd like to say something, so if we could just...
I'll wait until...
Yep.
Okay.
Before I just want to ask the committee members.
Well, I have a question. Can you give us in detail what the process is for the next 6 months? I mean, he's got to come in front of you guys again with the conceptual plan. Now he has to come in front with a real plan. What's the timeline on all this stuff? I mean, I agree with what Bob just said. 3 months seems awful short to get this started in 3 to 4 months. I would like to know what the timeline is, or what you guys really think. I mean, do you even have an engineer that has these next set of drawings done, Bill?
We're being worked on. It's good. The flood evaluation's been done. They've been considering that what has to be done. There's permitting that's required to be done. There's permitting with the town that'll be required. There's permitting with the state, as well as permitting with the Army Corps of Engineers. So we haven't been idle. We've been working on those elements. But some of those things are the same. What to do with the Army Corps, no matter what. So we've been moving ahead. So we're making progress.
So what's the next steps?
But it's, again, the goal is not going to be achieved, because in our letter of concurrence, we did state that the next tasks are a public discussion of proposed changes consistent with the deferral agreement, and the final design of the measures described in the optimization plan, the revised remedial plan. And these are to be completed by September 1 of this year. We're not going to meet that deadline.
And where does the public hearing for the townspeople come into play within that timeline?
That's, yeah. Well, this is...
September.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. I mean, that will happen. In fact, I really wasn't expecting this type of turnout and this type of discussion. As you had stated, I had different expectations for the meetings, and I thought it was really going to be further discussion on the details with AECOM and CNG.
That's what we all thought.
I'm glad to see you all here. That's fantastic. But this will not be the end-all for public participation. I just want to assure everybody that. But we are going to have to grant an extension of time for them to get this information together, a more detailed plan, so we have, so we can perform a better technical review, and so that there's a greater depth of information for the public to be able to review and comment on.
You said on, I think, one additional meeting prior to this, over in the museum area. The thing that bothers me is we have talked for a couple or 3 months about this. We have made it very clear as to what we would like to have done. UTC has listened very politely. I really thought we were making some progress. And it's clear to me tonight, it didn't make any difference. It didn't make a darn bit of difference. What Bill just read is what we had before we ever started this thing. There's something wrong with that process. You know, this is our town. You people will walk away from this, UTC will walk away from this, and I don't mean that literally, they'll be obligated to do all the monitoring stuff like that, but we've got to live with what you guys leave us, and we don't like it. You should understand that.
Noted. Well,
and something should change. Somebody should listen better, and somebody should start to compromise to make it work for both of us. The best negotiation is when two people walk away not happy. but it's good enough.
Well, I think, based upon what I heard earlier tonight, the opening statement, that the state probably should prepare itself for litigation, because the town apparently is, I mean, we're not gonna be happy with anything less than removing the 1,300 yards. So unless somebody can convince them to do it, this isn't gonna happen in the next year.
Well, and
Bill?
let me clarify that litigation is going to be between the town and UTAS.
Well,
Not the state.
but your project isn't gonna happen, the cleanup isn't gonna happen, we're gonna be, we'll be in court for
Well, we're definitely a party to everything.
Who knows
just
how
like
long.
the town is.
Bill, I'd like to ask you a question if I may, sir.
Sure.
What type of dynamic change would take place in your timeline and the plan that you have right now if the town were able to bring a developer into discussion with UTC on that site?
We were still going to do remediation next year. I mean, that would be, I mean, we'd talk to the developer, but we can't start remediation now. We still have an approval process to go through, we have design drawing to get approved, but we could talk with the developer and say, here's our remediation timeline. You know, we're planning to start this in 2019. The construction and the things will be done at this point in time, and then you can develop the property.
And who does that developer contact specifically at UTC to make that happen, or to at least start this discussion?
I have them, just for simplicity purposes, contact me, and I would direct them to the proper person.
All right.
So I don't do this stuff, but I can get this to the correct person.
Thank you.
You bet.
And that's something else that, you know, is a good point. If there is a viable prospective developer or purchaser, or a consensus on what that potential land use will be, that can be incorporated, those needs, infrastructure needs can be incorporated into the design of the CAP, say for utility conduits and stuff like this. You know, that can be addressed, excuse me, at the time of these measures being instituted. So don't have to go in and get a release from the LUR, remove all this stuff, put this stuff in, then redo everything. If that can be incorporated during that process, it's, you know, so much easier.
And what if this prospective developer says, I'm looking to team up with UTAS, remove that 1,300 cubic yards?
Better yet,
There's a monetary issue.
Better yet, Lenny, what happens if that developer says, I have an approved site for that 1,300 yards to go to? Would that change UTC's perspective in terms of the engineering and the placement of that soil on that site?
If it was removed from the site, it'd more likely have to go to a landfill.
Any other?
It can be reused on site, but it can't be taken from the site and then used to fill a different site.
Does anyone have other stuff?
It's to protect the land, to protect the waters. We don't want to put dirty soil on clean soil.
So are you
So
saying
Jessica-
if UTC decided to move it, you wouldn't allow them? Is that what you're now saying?
Well, Jessica, you should
I'd have to go
Yeah.
sign allow for the.
Guys, hold on one.
Yeah.
And where's the current landfill?
Request that, formally request at a prior meeting, that, to request that
Which
UTAS
we
provided, and we did, we made a motion, we voted on it, we asked them, we made a formal request. Jessica, I was gonna suggest that we have, with Mr. Hayes and then
Yeah.
anybody else from the public, maybe we could do it through you, and then we can see if there's more, because they may feed more ideas to the members here to ask questions. Or, I mean, they may give us some ideas too after they ask their questions.
So-
Any comments?
I'll kind of do it like we did the earlier
Yeah.
public participation. We'll start with Mr. Hayes.
Thanks, Committee, for your indulgence. Gil Hayes, I'm on the Economic Development Committee along with Bob. And we're in tough competition with surrounding towns to develop. And this little parcel here, if we can develop this parcel in Broadbrook, and our plans is to have a little village here, a quaint little village, and to get someone, and Mr. Stanley had mentioned someone who was interested. our committee doesn't know that, our commission doesn't know that yet, but there's always disclosure you have to give to anyone who wants to come in, whether it be a bunch of crap moved out of that corner, or it was there and it's covered over now, you still have to disclose that. And that is tough to lure people in, where they can go to Windsor Locks, or if they've been going to South Windsor, as we all know. But I'm more concerned about what Jason said about the public, and what you said about locked doors, once it's all processed. You've gone in, is it Bill? You've gone and your committee has spent money and time on your concept, and I'm sure that you don't want to give it up. Or UTC doesn't want to give it up, or UTAC doesn't want to give that up. So Mr. Robinson says our only recourse is litigation. Now, UTAC, I don't know, but I know UTC. And UTC has a good brand, known to be good to the public and very generous. And I don't think they want to go through a small town litigation about a pile of dirt. So I would take that back to your committee and says, hey, it's a small town, blue collar, they just want to be a clean place to live. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bill Lose, I think if you go down to Environmental Services in South Windsor, Mitchell Construction, they can give you a price for removal of 1,300 cubic yards with no problem at all, within a few days. And when the fire department, when we have a truck roll over, and there's a fuel that's dumped on the ground, we call them up, they're up there right away. It's up to the guy that owns the truck to take care of that and pay for that. Now, I'm sure he's got prices, he's got all kinds of truck and equipment. Once it leaves the site, it's up to him to make sure that nothing comes off of that truck and falls on the road. So,
I can get that
what's
tomorrow,
that?
the cost of that. Because Rich worked there for
Right.
years, I can get it.
And I'm sure that, you know, the price is out there, it's easy to get. And all you gotta do is call them people up, and he'll give you a price for so much yard. Take it from that site, and once it leaves the site, it's up to Environmental Protection, take care of the trucks. Anything that falls off in a truck, it's up to them. And he tells that all the time to everybody. So it's not a hard thing to get, it's easy to get.
I think the point being, it shouldn't take 2 months to get the price. And it also tells us that total removal of those contaminants wasn't even a consideration from the start. We went with the path of what can we do to meet the regulations, but not necessarily meet the needs of the community.
Right. Jessica, we also asked for the cost to, reiterate, we asked for the cost for them to build this consolidation site. It's gonna cost a lot of money to build it. So, you know, you have X dollars to remove it, you have Y dollars to build it. The real cost is the difference, because they're gonna save all that money, because they don't have to build a consolidation site.
Oh, yeah, they don't have to monitor it down the road.
And that's what Bill said earlier. He said the reason that the cost may be similar to leave it there or remove it is because they got monitoring costs. So that's why we asked for both. Now, to know the top cost, the maximum cost would be important, but the real number as well is the difference, the delta. And if it's zero or minimal, that's what I was saying earlier, that's no longer a business decision. That's another type of decision that's being made that runs totally counter to the needs of this town.
Well, I'm saying you get that one cost.
At least you know the max.
Yeah.
Right.
Paul, there were some other hands before, I just want to acknowledge.
Yeah, I just wanted to know how you based your 100-year flood plan, or you mentioned this would be taken care of on a 100-year flood plan. And we all know that the 100-year flood plan is pretty antiquated right now. Are we bound by that flood plan that's in existence now?
I'm not sure. I know maps are always being updated too, and they may have been updated.
But what are you basing your study on? The existing one, or is there any plans to update that to something more modern?
They're doing some hydrologic modeling, so I'm not sure what. I don't know all the details are going to. I'm sorry, I don't know.
No, that's okay. Just a question. I also, the environmental impact of removing this equipment, you said through the general public, the trucks moving through the roads and everything else. Why is it acceptable for this general public in this town to accept all that risk and not have the risk be minimized by moving that dirt or that fill to a landfill, as you said? And why can't we cap that dirt or that fill inside the truck so it doesn't have an impact on the environment? I'm just asking a question. Why that makes it, why would that make a difference when we already have the impact here and we want to remove it somewhere else?
Well, I think that's part of the consideration. There's already going to be a cap across the lion's share of the site. So all we're doing is putting an impermeable cap over a very limited area. So it's a minimal impact comparatively, as opposed to the site-wide cap, which is, don't quote me on the exact acreage, 5 or 6 acres versus a approximately half acre in a portion of the site that's probably not developable anyway, based on or optimally developed, but based on the geometry and the like. So it's a small area of the site that's appreciably not developed.
Okay. And then you mentioned the oxygenated enzymes that would be injected. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think those have anything to do with the chromium, the arsenic.
No, that's for the petroleum hydrocarbons.
Right, so do we have a whole lot of petroleum hydrocarbons on that site?
There are some extractable total petroleum hydrocarbons on that site, yes.
Okay.
Some of those are being removed and some are into the area, and the other ones that are remaining will be treated.
So those really won't be doing anything for any of the carcinogens on the site? Other than
there was another method that was being used to address the chromium. Right now, it's counterproductive because one has a reducing environment to address.
That was the original plan. The original plan had conflicting technologies for the groundwater and the soils, because they were doing the oxidizing, the air sparging SVE, and then adding a reductant. That's why we changed that to just excavating more soils to have the VOCs and chromium and sending those off-site.
And one more comment. Back in the early 2000s, when we were thinking discussions with you.
No, I'm sorry, so that has not. I'm not familiar with it. No.
Thank you.
We kind of, everything's been platformed off the 2010 RAP, which was approved to go forward and then revisit it. So that's the limits of my history.
Thank you.
Did you want to, or were you just stretching?
No, I want to say something, I guess. It is very obvious that this 1,300 cubic yards is a big nugget here. And so if these soils were removed from the site, what's the general consensus about the rest of the plan? Is there one?
Well, you made a comment earlier, I think was really important. You were talking about planning for development. For example, talk about utility corridors, or I think that was, I don't know if that's a phrase you used, but you've been at our meetings. I mean, we've been discussing those things. The possibility of developing as part of the ELUR, utility corridors, and dealing and talking about in terms of the detail, making that developable. We also have, you're not involved in our discussions about the historic building. The committee has also had discussions about restoring or saving the core central historic building, which is in pretty good shape. Some of the buildings, the ancillary buildings, have to get torn down, and using that as a springboard for future development. That a developer might be able to come in at some point and use that as a starting point for future development. So we wanted to have a site that could be a developer within reason could come in. No one said it's going to be a pristine site. There's going to be the VOCs. In fact, I think we talked with our consultants about the plan for the VOCs and the fact you can't remove them. Some of those soils you can't get access to and start digging that out. The plan is the chemical approach, and there's a bacterial approach and some removal. Oh yeah, some removal. So you know, the consolidation thing is the worst thing, because when you take those 13 cubic yards, you're digging them out of the site. That improves the site. You're left with a lot of coal ash and with VOCs and some residual carcinogens that are buried down in the bottom of those holes. So it's really done a pretty good job of cleaning up that site. And we thought that a developer would be able to come in within reason and get potentially future approvals from the state to do what they needed to do something with it. So I'm just speaking for myself. From what I know about the plan, it sounds like if the consolidation site is gone and the rest of it is engineered within reason, then there's a workable plan.
However, one point, and that is, before we can answer that question, we have to understand what the restrictions would be that are placed on that site by DEEP. If after that material is removed, the consolidation material is removed, and you still say, you know, you got to hang by your thumbs for 4 months before you can start a bulldozer, then that probably ain't very good for a developer. So you got to tell us the rest of the story, and that is, if it's agreed to get that out of there, which is a big nut for us to swallow, then you got to tell us what are the hoops the developer has to go through to develop that site. We have to understand that.
Yeah. If that was not in play, the only restriction I believe that would be required is assurance that the soils would remain inaccessible under the cap. So that means a no-dig type of thing, no-dig restriction.
Well, you could dig with approval by the state.
You'd have to get a release from the EOUR, temporary release, do what you need to do, demonstrate that then you put it back the way it was after you, say if you're going to put more footings in somewhere or whatever, or the utility trench.
Right.
But so that is doable, and it really does happen all the time. There are so many locations in the site, in the state, I mean, where we have historical pollution. You know, we were an industrial state here. You know, we were the forefront of everything. But then we do have a legacy of contaminants, and we have so many sites that have been redeveloped into residential facilities, commercial facilities, and it ranges from each corner of the state. You know, it is a viable engineering process. It is acceptable. It does mitigate the exposure risk to human health. And that is the primary key here of what we're concerned about is human health. We're also concerned about the environment. But human health is primary. So we do not approve of a plan that's not going to address those issues. We like to think that nothing really slips through the cracks, but you know, things do. But really, if a high-profile case and if it's subject to our review and approval, we really go through it, you know, with magnifying glass to make sure that it meets the standards, it meets the requirements, that the maintenance monitoring is going to be appropriate, that if necessary, depending on the type of control, that we have the financial means in place to conduct that maintenance monitoring over a course of time. And many situations also requires ongoing groundwater monitoring. And again, depending on the length that's projected, that may require the responsible party to enter a stewardship permit, which locks them into that long-term monitoring for a number of years. So we do have lots of mechanisms, we do have lots of success stories out there for this very type of situation. I know you don't like it in your town. Nobody likes it in their town. It's part of the history of the town.
Bob, we even have to understand the 2-foot versus 4-foot cap. That changes construction techniques considerably. If you have a 2-foot cap, you got to have a slab on the ground. If you can go down through it with a foundation.
You can cover it with grass, and it can just be open land.
Well, yeah, I know. What if I want to build a building there and I want to go down 4 feet for a footing and a frost wall?
Right. Then there's the means to go ahead and get a temporary release from the land use restriction. Right. So you go ahead and do the engineering project, and then you record that EOUR.
Bob, that site has existing utilities to the building. It's got stormwater system in there. It's got some water pipes coming in. What we were hoping to do is to have those utilities remain accessible. I don't know if you talked about like corridors, or we were hoping that the cleanup would allow for those utilities that exist to be usable, so that they could be, and that site, that would help further the potential use for that building. So that's an area, you said, what did we think about if we got rid of the consolidation piece? And Utah's had told us at one point that would be willing to work with the town to ensure that the existing utilities are accessible, right? Otherwise, it would shut everything down. Like if you couldn't get access to the sewer pipe for repair.
Well, that's one of the things with the land use restriction. There's a lot of legal work that has to go through it. Right. And one of it is getting subordination agreements from everybody that has access, like utility companies. They have to subordinate to that land use restriction, and they have to be able to have access to their utilities. So that's all embedded in that whole process.
So, Bill, how do we, as a committee, get AECOM to come to one of these meetings so they can communicate with our consultants and with us? How do we make that happen?
Unfortunately, they couldn't come to, they have come to meetings, and unfortunately, they couldn't come tonight. But, when I looked at, as Jessica said, we did expect us to do a point-by-point comment. I don't think there's a lot of point-by-point comments to make, because a lot of their letter was describing the project itself, and then has some comments. I think the gist of the comments, a lot of them were more reflective that things that were happening in the design. Would you think that's a fair sum? I think some of the things we're talking about now, utility corridors or things like that. So I think those are things that would be going forward. So they certainly can talk, but I think we understand the gist of their comments on the remediation plan and in facilitating redevelopment. And I think it was alluded to before. We've talked about that before, and we're amenable to that. So we don't see the consolidation area as a hindrance to redevelopment, given what we see, as like Rob described, at the many sites in our industrial legacy of Connecticut. So,
I'm not going to speak for the committee. I'm going to speak for myself, sitting as a member of the committee right now. I know the engineers and the consultants understand each other. I think it's us or me that needs to try to understand their vernacular and their language and why it is what it is. I think part of the problem throughout the entire last 24 years has been a committed level of communication from all sides, okay? And the fact that now we feel it's the 11th hour and we're approaching the 59th minute, and we don't know any more today than we knew 24 years ago, 14 years ago, or 4 years ago. We don't understand the DEP process. We don't understand how it works. And I think a lot of the lack of communication and the lack of not knowing what the process is has created, I can speak for myself right now, a great deal of frustration. I lived there. I lived there for over a year. It was a wonderful place to live. It was a vibrant community within the center of the village of Broadbrook, and it served a wonderful purpose. There were children playing out on the lawns. There were pets. There were people that chose to live there. And it would be really nice to see that property integrated back into a useful, taxable purpose for this community. And please don't take any of the comments tonight as directed in a negative or accusatory fashion. They're directed out of concern and probably more so a lack of understanding and a reaching out for that communication, which is probably why the level of disappointment that AECOM wasn't here tonight was expressed the way it was.
Well, we share we want to redevelop the properties in the open parts, that we share that, that vision for the site to be redeveloped in the future.
It really needs to be viable for this town and for this village. For the town as a whole, but specific to this village.
And we think the plan as proposed can meet that purpose, but we're still talking and working.
Paul, and I saw you back there as well.
Okay, I'll make it short. Paul Anderson again. Okay, I think we made it relatively clear tonight that the town of East Windsor is not interested in a consolidation plan. We want the material moved off the site at 1,300 yards. Cost is not a factor, it's nonsense. The whole concept of arguing about it is a waste of time. It's not going to be here, and we'll do what it takes to make sure it isn't going to be here. So I think there's room for adjustment. Now, a couple of things that you're going to find out about this town. Meeting minimum requirements isn't good enough. I don't care if their plan meets all the absolute minimums. It's not enough. We will not accept it just as is. Tonight, we were told, here it is. That's not going to cut it. And one of the statements that Bill made in his presentation was there would be up to 2 feet of cover. What kind of nonsense is that? If we're cutting from 4 down to 2, 2 should be a minimum, not an up to. I don't understand that language. And when we hear it, it slides through and nobody pays attention. I wrote it down. It ain't gonna cut it, okay? And right now, the way this was coming across was that, okay, DEP has already consented to this plan, and we're gonna have a public information meeting, which is not public input. That's not a public hearing. That's talking to people and telling them what you want to tell them. That's not what we do here. This is the town meeting form of government in this town, and we operate, the public runs the town. So you can't just go find somebody you can convince and get them to sign off. If we don't sign off, it ain't gonna happen. And if we have to spend millions of dollars to go to court, guess what? We're on our way. Too bad. And if UTC wants to put up with that kind of publicity, have a good time. You're gonna look like a piece of dirt. Much worse than the dirt that's there.
No, really. That was great. I agree with you. Some things were a little embarrassed, but I agree.
Just one quick comment. I didn't see the whole thing, but unless I'm wrong, your entire argument is based on trust us. Exactly. Is that right? Trust my engineering, trust our stuff, trust our plan. That it won't leak, it won't break, it won't go wrong.
Well, we're not just creative. These are things that have been discussed, have been employed at hundreds of sites around the country. They're not just minimum standards, they meet industry standards for what is required. So it's not just minimum standards, we're meeting what is required, the industry standards to protect human health and the environment.
Well, that may be true, but they probably did that immediately when that bridge fell. They probably thought that, in a lot of places, where they had a 500-year flood 2 years in a row down in Texas. So engineering is based on calculations and percentages and probabilities, but it's not perfect.
So what do you propose, sir?
Get rid of the damn soil. At $100 a yard, it's only $1.3 million.
So you're talking about the 1,300?
Yeah. At 30, it's $1.3 million at $100 a yard. At $100 a yard, I'll buy it for you. I'll sell you for that.
Go ahead.
Bob Like again, speaking for myself and not the Economic Development Commission. My first thought after all of this discussion and it wasn't the dialogue that I expected and you expected and the Board of Selectmen expected, was everything's predicated by the almighty dollar. But guess what? Nobody got any answers on how much it's going to cost. Rather than to continue what is an embarrassing situation, I would think, for both Bill and Bob, who are left to me to feel like, don't shoot the messenger. I'll look into it for you. I'll get you some answers. I think a steadfast improvement in communication so that the next get-together consists of the decision makers from both of those bodies, or people, okay? But I want to end it on a more positive thought and commend again the questions, as tenacious as they were respectful, coming not only from this commission, but the member of the Board of Selectmen and the audience. And I want this to continue, and I want to say that I know that every time you have a meeting, you have public input. And I think everybody here ought to encourage their friends and neighbors, because I haven't heard anybody say that they were on the side of doing anything other than the complete removal and remediation of that project over there. So let's stay positive, let's stay together. This is not a political divisive scenario whatsoever, and it's a good opportunity to get this town to come together in the interest of the health and the happiness and the welfare of our taxpayers, and to develop something in there worthwhile that's going to continue to add to our tax base.
Thank you. I'm going to grab her first. Go ahead.
Yeah, early on in the beginning of the meeting, the question was stated, I believe, by Mr. Bugaloff to you, that is cost factor. And it's been the common theme is cost factor, cost factor. But you started to say it's not only the cost factor, but then you proceeded to say that, you know, the trucks being on the streets and the effect it might have on the well-being and health of people, if there should be any spillage or overflow, and I don't remember your exact word. You wanted to say something else and you were kind of cut off. Are there other reasons why that bottom line decision by you was read tonight from the company, other than those two factors?
There's so much discussion. I think that covers it. Thank you for asking that. I don't recall anything else now.
John?
Yeah, just a kind of closing on this. I'm very troubled by the responses that were given. As my friend Andy says, all you did was kick the can down the road a ways from where this has been. We don't have any answers. And that's what this was about. And it's about the money. Now, I look at this as, to you, Mr. Penn, that UTC, whoever you represent, has a moral obligation to fix this problem and take this out of here. And to you, Mr. Robinson, when you made the comment that, you know, this mill has been here for centuries, we can't take everything out of there that's there. We're talking about 1,300 cubic yards. You missed that whole thing. We didn't ask you to do anything else. We asked you to take that out. So I don't see an unbiased picture here to what you're doing. State departments are supposed to be there to help the towns and help the people solely for that purpose. And I don't see that here whatsoever. Very, very disappointing. And this is something that is going to go up. We're not going to just wait and see what's going to happen. You know, we're going to bring national media to this, because if you don't think UTC is going to respond and do the right thing, then we need to do that. Now, I asked a question about, has there been any incident of that impervious cover anywhere in Connecticut being ruptured? You didn't know. If you're approving this in this, what you did, I would have asked that question. I would have asked somebody that question. I know what the answer is. And to build a toxic waste dump and there's no permit, not doable. And that's what it is. It's a toxic waste dump, period.
I have one question for Mr. Robinson. Again, my name's Catherine Nealon. Why is it that the company that polluted the property is allowed to clean it up instead of hiring an independent contractor? Why is it that they are the ones who are going to be responsible for monitoring it and not an independent contractor? Frankly, no offense against you, Bill, personally, but how can we trust a company which is looking to just continue the dump, continue the mess? And how can we say that they're going to be the ones who are going to monitor it if it is left like that? Why is it that there was not an independent contractor hired?
AECom is not a subsidiary of UTC. They are an independent contractor. It is a requirement that responsible parties in this situation, they hire outside consultants because we don't want that ethical issue to arise. And that is one of our requirements in all remedial projects. The people that are responsible for signing off on these things and doing the work cannot be, they're in the employment, but they can't be a subsidiary of that, associated with the business of that responsible party. So in essence, they are a private contractor.
So do we have the names of the companies of all the private contractors that are going to be involved? Including the monitoring, and including the digging, and including the transportation?
Well, the AECom is going to be the ones that are doing most of that oversight work. That's always subbed out in terms of like the trucking business, labs that do the analysis. Those are subbed out.
Are they being paid by DEEP or UTC? Jessica, I just want to make, I think we're kind of wrapping it up. I just wanted to make two comments about what I think are positive comments about tonight. First, the discussion has all been very civil. There's been some hard comments made and direct comments made, but nothing personal. And I think that reflects our community. This is the people are educated. They're becoming knowledgeable about the issues. And that's what this community is people that want to focus on the issues, and they can be passionate, but it was extraordinarily respectful tonight. I think there was nobody leveled any personal comments at anybody from either side. The other comment is we do have a decision maker. Mr. Robinson, he's a decision maker. Someone said we don't have a decision maker here tonight, and I was affected by you asked some questions, like direct questions. How is this consolidated? You've identified the consolidation issue as a primary issue for our community. Our committee and our community have come to our meetings, so you know that already. And you've recognized the public sentiment about it. And you asked a question, if that issue was resolved, how do we feel about the rest of the plan? So I took your comments as being, taking into consideration what people said tonight, and I think you're going to, because that's the kind of person I think you've demonstrated you are when you've come to our meetings, and I take that as a positive. I think we have an opportunity to make some progress by working both with UTAS and with DEEP, and to continue our discussions and to work with the Board of Selectmen and to get more public input. So I don't see it as all negative. I think we have an opportunity to move ahead with offer the discussion today, and public input was so important, because unless the public comes out and these folks see that the public is concerned. And by the way, this meeting wasn't really publicized. It was intentionally supposed to be a low-key meeting. You should know that. We thought it was going to be discussion. So we said we wanted a low-key meeting that was not going to be heavily publicized, just so that we could focus on our discussion. And this is the turnout and concern you get without really asking the public to come and comment. So anyway, I thought those were positives.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I want to ask Bill or Rob if you want to make any closing statements before the rest of us do. Oh, you got one question? Go for it. I'm sorry.
Being the fact that you asked about the 1,300 yards, and if that was taken care of, taken away. Would you go back to your people with that recommendation that that is a major concern of the town? And so when they come with their final plan, maybe that can be implemented, because we're all looking to see when we could do something like that. That would be the time if you could further that information along to your decision-making people.
That primarily, and, other comments have been presented here. There will be discussion between us and UTC.
I mean, that's a great first step, if that's all we get out of this meeting.
That's the purpose.
This is
of
a
having
perfect,
this kind of meeting,
perfect
to
step.
get this feedback, understanding the emotions of the situation. No, there will be some discussion.
That's a good thing out of this meeting, my feeling.
Thank you.
Do you guys have any further comments?
No, thank you. I never took anything personal, but thank you all very much.
Any members of our commission, our committee? Anything further?
Make a motion to adjourn?
Oh, hold on. Hold on. Wow. Hold on, give me a moment. I know. I do want to reiterate that it is important for all of us to continue to have our voices be heard, to continue to have input. That's why I asked the question tonight of who do we contact. I think it is important to keep in mind that we can contact people. We can contact our state representatives. We can continue to encourage our local representatives and us at this committee to continue these discussions. We can contact these folks. We can put that information on the town website. And I do invite you all to attend our meetings. It's the first and third Wednesday, 7 o'clock at the Historical Society in the Osborne House. We'll be looking to do a presentation to the Board of Selectmen at their next meeting. I'll be sending you an email for that so that we can offer more information. But it's definitely having the information that we have tonight, knowing that sort of that contamination area is still going to remain. I think it's more important now than ever to continue to have our voices heard, as well as to discuss the buildings themselves and how we feel about that part of this issue. So that's all I want to say. Now you can move.
Actually, I do want to retract to say, if you have any additional comments or want to formalize them a little bit better, please, I'm going to volunteer you, Jessica. Go ahead and send them to Jessica. And if you can go ahead and consolidate these and send them to me.
Another consolidation.
Wrong word.
I'll send one a day. Yeah, you guys, I can put my email on the website so that you guys have it.
Or just come through our meeting.
Yes, please do. All right, now,
Move to adjourn?
second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. Yeah, thank
Timmy.
The good work. We tried.
None
at all. You get a badge?